Okay, so for those of you who haven't guessed, this is a response to ExaggeratedElegy's video, Changing History. As you rightly said, it's interesting food for thought, and excellent fodder for fiction and other such musings, and so, as requested, here's what I think of it for whatever it's worth, and I apologise in advance for any incoherence. First up, you cannot, no matter how humanistic you wish yourself to be, boil down the human experience to simple numbers. I mean, there's far more to it than that. We as individuals are a product of our history. The choices we have made, the things we have done, all that have come together to create the individual you see before you, or the animated avatar thereof. Similarly, with the human race, it is highly possible that by preventing the Second World War, as an example, you could, in the long run, save many, many more lives. But what would the knock-on effect of that be for the human character? We are what we are now because of events like that. You remove such events, or you lessen their impact, or even increase their impact, and you change the character of the race. It could be that preventing the Second World War would save many, many more lives in the long run, but as an effect, create a society that is far worse and far less pleasant to live in than the one we have at present. More so than that, on a far more personal level, World War II was far more complicated a tale than simply a clash between two huge international alliances. It was a story about the pain and suffering of anyone not of the right race or religion. It was a story about the darkest depths to which man can sink in its inhumanity to man. It was a story about destruction on a terrible scale of famine, poverty, and death. It was also a story about an African tribesman who went to fight for the great white king across the sea and returned to his people a warrior and hero. It was also a story about stubborn defiance in the face of a seemingly unbeatable foe. It was also a story about millions of men and women who were willing to give everything they had to protect the ones they loved. It was, in essence, the complete gamut of the human experience. So, in a person's attempt to be humanistic by boiling it down to simple numbers, they would ultimately miss out on what it is to be human, for better or worse. Secondly, one thing that always fascinates me about what would you change questions is that the answers always seem to boil down to preventing something like a major war or some other tragedy. But a far more interesting and I think pertinent question would be, what if the only way to get a better future was to create or exacerbate a tragedy? For those that have read the Watchmen comic book by Alan Moore, you'll know where I'm going with this. For those that haven't, what the hell's the matter with you? So, in that spirit, here's a question for you and anyone else watching this video. Supposing you could see all of history laid out before you. You could see all the what-if scenarios and all the futures they would yield if they'd come to pass. You look through all the possible futures for humanity, and in amongst them all, you see one, just one, perfect possible future. In this future, there is no war, there's no famine, there's little to no disease. The human race is living in peace and harmony. You know, it's the stereotypical utopia. But there are no dark secrets. It is what it appears to be. It is paradise. You trace the thread of this history from this perfect possible future to the divergent point, to the point in history where the timelines split to go their separate ways. You see that point, it's sometime in the 1940s. And you see that to reach this one and only perfect possible future where countless millions of lives have been saved and are saved every day, where the lives of all are happy and carefree, to reach this paradise, you would have to engineer the Holocaust to be harder, longer, and far more brutal, to the point where every Jew had been exterminated. Now, I use the Holocaust simply for effect here, because it's a very emotive topic, and rightly so. What I'm asking you in simpler terms is if to set the human race on the path that would bring about the one and only perfect possible future, you had to engineer a crime against humanity more heinous than all others put together, that you had to personally ensure the brutalization, torture, and ultimately the murder of tens of millions of men, women, and children, would you do it? If you break it down to simple numbers, then the answer is simple. The lives of tens of millions versus the lives of billions? Fuck 'em. But numbers, no matter what statisticians would say, often tell you nothing. My answer is simple. Paradise isn't worth that. Nothing is worth that. Hopefully that's been a bit more food for thought, and if you've made it this far, thanks. Keep on rocking in the free world.